the World Bank Country Director, Pierre Laporte, make the claim that some power purchase agreements that were entered into by the previous administration, the Mahama administration, has led to the increase in energy sector debts, which have also resulted in excess power that we're having to pay for. But what's the origin of this? Is this claim accurate in taking into consideration the origin of it and then the context that we're looking at?
I think it's interesting that the World Bank is getting itself into the forefront of this discussion because, again, when I look back at this whole gas-fired power sector, which is where some of these issues are arising, the World Bank has made some serious mistakes in relation to understanding our national energy situation. You know, in the 80s and early 90s, when GMPC, as a result of this gas mandate, was insisting that, you know, based on all the evidence available, gas was an important source to complement and supplement the power from hydro sources. At that time, the view of the World Bank was against having additional capacity from gas resources. Because the argument of the World Bank, and the reason I'm raising this is because fuel costs are a major part of the problem that we have about the power sector. You know, fuel costs are a major part of the problem. And some of those fuel costs have to do with even going back to the use of light crude oil, when, again, this was at the insistence of the World Bank, that light crude oil was a better option because, and the reason was interesting, because according to their analysis and some of the consultants of VRA at that time, the thermal power was just going to complement the hydro. In other words, Ghana really didn't need additional capacity. That was the position of the World Bank. It's documented. Yes.
Use light crude oil.
So light crude oil for them was only going to be needed in the 1 year in 7 when the water level is low. So in 1 year in 7, you buy crude oil, rather than, according to them, commit yourself to a long-term gas offtake. Now, at that time, we were saying it's clear that, you know, the country's growth is going to require more and more power. And, you know, there's documentation which shows that they took a different position. They were on this trajectory of 1 year and 7. So VRA began to have to face the cost of light crude oil for the Abuazi plants. That was really the beginning of a lot of these high costs in the energy sector, which have exploded. They've continued and they've exploded. The high costs, and they literally collapsed the balance sheet of VRA because they were having to, you know, buy fuel, light crude oil, and light crude oil costs, as you know, I mean, they're very volatile and sometimes they go through the roof in certain periods. And so for me, it is kind of ironic that, you know, the World Bank Country Director is not tracing back the history of how we've got to where we've come to, because that history is frankly rooted in certain positions that the World Bank took. And those positions meant that when we later had shortages, we had to resort to emergency solutions, you know, which naturally came at a higher cost than what it would have been if you had planned ahead. In those days, we were projecting certain requirements for additional power based on the, you know, growth of the economy as we thought from the data that we had, you know, from the different sources, you know. And they said that VRA should not burden itself with getting locked into gas supply. They should rather go with light crude oil. And based on this view that the light crude oil will give thermal complementation during the 1 year in 7 when the water level of hydro is low. When you look at the situation today, if those gas projects did not go ahead such that gas supply became available to Ghana, how today hydropower is 32.4% or whatever of the capacity, the power sector capacity. Thermal provides 66 and more percent, renewable only a small percent. So, I mean, if gas had not been, you know, sort of insisted upon and developed, where would we be at? Again, the World Bank, which had in the past resisted GMPC's approach on gas, when it came to a project involving ENI and Vitol in the 2015-2016 period, the Sankofa Jinyami project, I mean, the World Bank could accept to guarantee payments to private sector companies at a gas price of $9.8 per million BTUs. That's a very high gas price. In fact, it's about 4 times the kind of gas price that they were saying we should be looking at, you know, in the period when, you know, we were having those discussions about gas. What they thought would be a reasonable price of gas and so on, 2.5, and later they were providing guarantees for a $9.8 price. I gather there's been some reductions in that price in more recent years, but basically the World Bank provided a guarantee, and that guarantee, I think, cost up, I think, over half $500 million. You know, because basically the World Bank was guaranteeing payments to the foreign companies involved, but at a time when GMPC was looking for some guarantees to develop its gas project, the World Bank thought, you know, the country would not need that additional power. And so I think really, I mean, the country director should really go back a little bit into the origins of the problem of energy sector debt. And because, as I said, I mean, the crude oil and the effect it had on VRA and the way VRA then had to go back to the government. And of course, you could never set a power price which would enable you to recover, you know, sufficient for you know, that kind of crude oil price. And those are problems which I believe the World Bank itself needs to face, because I think they owe it to us to be part of the solution, since they've been part of the problem.
They've been part of the problem.
Very much so.